It's Boris Spassky versus Bobby Fischer in a legendary showdown. We're diving into a Benoni defense where we expect fireworks from the very start. The opening is classic Benoni. Spassky builds a powerful pawn center, while Fischer prepares to fianchetto his bishop and attack from the flank. White expands in the center and develops the bishop to g5, but Fischer immediately challenges it with a pawn push to h6. Spassky plays the bishop back to h4, and this is the first inaccuracy of the game. The bishop becomes a target here, and a better move was bishop to f4 to keep the pressure on. This retreat simply invites black's next move, and Fischer pounces. He pushes his pawn to g5, kicking the bishop back, and then develops his queen to a5 to put immediate pressure on white's center. And here it comes. Black's knight takes the pawn on a4, a brilliant sacrifice from Fischer to shatter white's central control and begin a devastating attack. The follow-up is forced and brutal. White recaptures, but black smashes the queenside pawn structure with bishop takes c3 check, and after the recapture, the queen lands on c3 with another check, forcing the king to f1. And here, Fischer finds the incredible pawn to f5. This is the only move that maintains his huge advantage, shutting down white's bishop and preparing to completely suffocate Spassky's position. What a move! Spassky tries to get his pieces organized, but Fischer is relentless, improving his position and pushing his pawn up to g4 to further cramp the white pieces. Another fantastic move from black. The pawn marches to f4, and this is just crushing. It completely entombs white's bishop on g3, turning it into a spectator for the rest of the game. White's knight hops to e2, desperately looking for a square where it can have some influence on the game. Fischer correctly decides to cash in, and his pawn takes the bishop on g3. This is the most precise move, ripping open the f-file for his rook to join the attack. Spassky's knight recaptures on g3, but Fischer wastes no time, immediately seizing the open highway with his rook swinging to a8. Spassky plays his rook to c2, but this is an inaccuracy. The defense was much tougher after queen to c2. This move allows black's knight to join the party, heading for the dominant e5 square, and Fischer's plan unfolds perfectly. The knight comes to d7, and after white's queen grabs a pawn on g4, the knight lands on the beautiful e5 outpost. But Spassky finds the only move to stay in the game. Queen to e4 is a fantastic defensive resource, holding the position together and preventing an immediate collapse. Fischer now calmly improves his position. He develops his bishop, castles his king to safety on the queen side, and prepares to bring his final rook into the battle on the g-file. Spassky pushes his pawn to f4, and this is another mistake. It doesn't solve his problems and only weakens key squares around his king, giving Fischer a brand new target to attack. Fischer's knight immediately jumps into c4 to exploit the weakness, and Spassky's knight responds, hopping over to h5, and now queen to f7, a brilliant, stunning move from Fischer. He's offering a sacrifice. The idea is that if white's queen takes the knight on c4, black's queen will recapture on h5 with a completely winning attack. Spassky takes the bait. His queen captures the knight on c4, and just as Fischer planned, the black queen recaptures the knight on h5. The final attack is on. Spassky is in deep trouble and needed to find the most resilient defense. The best try here was rook to c3. After queen to f5, the other rook swings to h3, the black rook lands on g4, and the pawn advances to g3. But in the game, Spassky plays the rook to b2, an inaccuracy that allows Fischer to ramp up the pressure even more. Fischer methodically builds his attack. The rook lands on g3, and after a bit of shuffling, he doubles up with his other rook to g8, creating overwhelming threats on the g-file. Spassky plays his queen to b3, another inaccuracy. This move doesn't really threaten anything, and the engine much preferred rook to f2 to try and coordinate a defense. Fischer calmly pushes his pawn to b6, shutting down the queen, which is forced to retreat back to e3. A rare slip from Fischer with queen to f6. He's still completely winning, but this misses the most clinical finish, which was bishop to g4 to force trades and simplify into a winning endgame. Spassky brings his rook to e2, trying to find any defensive idea to hold on. And incredibly, Fischer misses the killer move again. The most decisive path to victory was still available. Bishop to g4. White must trade with bishop takes g4 check. The rook recaptures, queen to e6 check, and after the queens are traded on e6, it's over. But back in the actual game, Fischer plays bishop to b5, letting a little bit of his huge advantage slip away. Spassky defends with his rook to d2, but Fischer changes plans and thrusts his pawn forward to e5, ripping open more lines for his attack. And this is a major error from Spassky. Opening the position is the last thing he wants to do. He absolutely had to keep things closed with king to f2. After queen to g7, queen to e4, pawn takes f4, and white plays pawn to a4. Instead of that, Spassky captures the pawn on e6, and this just invites black's pieces to flood into the attack. Fischer plays his bishop to c6. It's still a winning move, but the computer points out an even more forceful line, starting with an immediate rook sacrifice on g2. Spassky is on the ropes and has to find the most stubborn defense. The best chance was king to f2. Rook takes g2 check, king to e1, bishop takes f3, and queen recaptures. But in the game, he makes the final error. The king steps to f1, and this walks right into a forced combination that loses on the spot, and there's the winning move. Bishop takes bishop on f3. This simple capture is decisive. White's position completely collapses as the threat of the e-pawn promoting is now unstoppable. And after that move, Boris Spassky resigned. A tactical masterpiece from Bobby Fischer, who punished a series of small mistakes to score a brilliant victory. Black wins.